What's up, people? I'm in my car right now. I just saw this video on Talk Sport, and they were talking Simon Jordan and this other dude. I don't know his name. They were talking about Frank Bruno versus Anthony Joshua, and they were talking about if Frank Bruno was underrated and all this stuff. I think Frank Bruno, like a lot of old fighters from the past, has become ridiculously overrated. Nostalgia is crazy, man. I'm telling you, in 30 years, people are going to be talking about Anthony Joshua like he was Muhammad Ali. I'm telling you, the way people talk. And the thing is, they're talking about Frank Bruno versus Anthony Joshua. I think this is a joke. He's not in Anthony Joshua's league at all. This is just classic nostalgia. It's just hilarious. First of all, he's a way worse version of Anthony Joshua. He's not nearly as big as Anthony Joshua. He looked big in that era because he was going up against guys like Mike Tyson and Bone Crusher Smith. But in reality, he's only about 230 pounds. Joshua was like 240, bigger, stronger. And frankly, better, just a way better athlete. And I know for all of Joshua's flaws that he has with conditioning, you know, Frank Bruno makes Anthony Joshua look like prime Larry Holmes or, prime Ali when it comes to conditioning. Because, Frank Bruno's his conditioning was horrible. I don't think he had more power than Joshua. Definitely was not a better combination puncher than Joshua. And the only thing I could really give Frank Bruno is the jab over Anthony Joshua. What's funny about Frank Bruno? He's like the most protected fighter, and every single time he stepped up, he lost and got knocked out. And we can go through it right now because I know I got a lot of UK people watching this. He stepped up versus Bone Crusher Smith. I think that was the first one. He got knocked out. He stepped up versus Tim Witherspoon. He got knocked out. Oh, but he was winning the fight, but then he gassed out. Yeah, that's what happens when you don't have a good gas tank. He stepped up versus Mike Tyson. He got knocked out. He stepped up versus Lennox Lewis. I know he did well in that fight for the first 4 rounds, but he got knocked out. And then he fought Oliver McCall. And here's the background of the Oliver McCall fight. Oliver McCall had an upset victory over Lennox Lewis, which was very surprising. Don King had Mike Tyson coming out of prison around that time. Don King knew that Oliver McCall was a very dangerous guy for Mike Tyson to fight because he had been Mike Tyson's old sparring partner, and he gave him a lot of fits. Now, Oliver McCall was not a great fighter, but he had a great chin, so he's a hard guy to get out of there. Probably the best chin in boxing history, Oliver McCall. Don King knew all this. So what does he do? He gets Oliver McCall to fight Frank Bruno, and he convinces Oliver McCall to fire Emmanuel Stewart as his trainer because he made this whole thing up that Emmanuel Stewart was, trying to sabotage him. And at that point in time, Oliver McCall was going through a lot. He had a lot of mental issues and a lot of drug problems, as was seen in the Lennox Lewis second fight, as he had that breakdown in the ring. And he made a condition that if Frank Bruno beats Oliver McCall in Frank Bruno's first title defense, he's got to fight Mike Tyson again because Don King is a legend, and he understands that to get Mike Tyson the title back, he needs to get it in Frank Bruno's hands because Mike Tyson had already beat Frank Bruno once. So what happens? He beats Oliver McCall, and McCall's not, he's battling his personal demons and is not actually the Oliver McCall that beat Lennox. And even in that fight, he was holding on for dear life in the last few rounds, I believe. And then what happens in the last fight of his career versus Mike Tyson? Of course, he gets knocked out. So let's just review. In the big fights of Frank Bruno's career, knocked out versus James Bone Crusher Smith, knocked out versus Tim Witherspoon, knocked out versus Mike Tyson, knocked out versus Lennox Lewis, barely beat a drug addict Oliver McCall, and then gets knocked out by Mike Tyson again. This guy's not good. I don't know what people think. Like, he had a very basic style. His conditioning sucked. He has no survival. He probably has one of the worst survival skills of any boxer ever. Yeah, he had a good jab and a very basic style. He did have some power, and he did hurt Mike Tyson in that first fight. But and here's another thing about the whole Anthony Joshua versus Frank Bruno, and this is going to sound crazy to a lot of people. Anthony Joshua was mentally tougher than Frank Bruno. Anthony Joshua had more self-belief than Frank Bruno. Frank Bruno didn't believe in himself, and Simon Jordan brought this up when he hurt Mike Tyson. He kind of was like, oh my God, I actually hurt Mike Tyson? He didn't think he could ever seriously beat them, and he couldn't. So that's what I got to say. I got Anthony Joshua knocking him out. I'm going in round, 8. Anthony Joshua, KO. Frank Bruno, like a lot of old fighters from the UK, gets ridiculously overrated. Just old heavyweights in general. I don't know. People think that like all these guys were like world beaters, but in reality, they used to make fun of Frank Bruno when he was fighting. They used to say, oh, he's some guy who, is just, the joke of the heavyweight division. That's how they would portray him. And the only reason why Frank Bruno got all these shots at the title, and this is what they don't tell you in these videos about Frank Bruno, the only reason Frank Bruno got all these shots at the title was because Frank Bruno back then was the only heavyweight contender of note that was from the UK, and that was a growing market in heavyweight boxing. Now you got Anthony Joshua, Tyson Fury, Joe Joyce, Dylan White. You got all these guys, Daniel Dubois. Back then, you didn't have all that. You didn't have Derek Chisora also. You didn't have all these guys. He was the only guy back then because it was all dominated by America. If you look at the top 10 from that era, it was mostly Americans. Now, the top 10 is mostly UK people. So the only reason he got all these title shots versus American heavyweights and Lennox Lewis, who's Canadian, I don't want to hear about him being British, is because he was an English fighter, and that was a big market. Otherwise, he's not getting 6 different shots at the world title. Like, it's not happening. So, yeah, Frank Bruno has become ridiculously overrated. Anthony Joshua knocks him out. I'm going around 8. And you know what actually would be a good fight? Would be the fight with him and Dylan White. And I'm going to make a video about that, actually. Dylan White is Frank Bruno. That's an actual 50-50 fight. But Anthony Joshua versus Frank Bruno, that's just laughable. And to answer the question also about, I saw, would he be in the top 5 now with Wilder, Joyce, Fury, Usyk, and Joshua? No. He might not even be in the top 10 right now. To be honest with you, I don't think he beats Frank Sanchez. I don't think he beats Hrgovic, to be completely honest with you. I think Ortiz a few years ago would have beat him. I think Parker a few years ago would have beat him. I'm going to save the Dylan White pick for later. But, yeah, Andy Ruiz, I think, knocks him out. Like, this guy's not good. Like, I'm sorry. He's not a good heavyweight, Frank Bruno. Maybe he would make the top 10, depending on the circumstances. But, yeah, I'm not seeing, when I see him fight, it's like, this guy's kind of basic. Let me know what you guys think. I got Anthony Joshua knocking out Frank Bruno, round 8. Please like, share, comment, subscribe, and check out my other fantasy fights. Peace.